Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Inforunners podcast. And today we're going to be talking about companion vessels in Star Citizen. And these are kind of the unsung heroes and also redheaded stepchilds of Star Citizen. I'm Dasein was here.
And this is Hayes. And to start us off with the 85X, it's sort of like it's everything a snub or small ship companion vessel really should be. It's got that high level of utility. It's a two-seater, so it can be used as a shuttle. Small amount of cargo, decent amount of weaponry. It's sort of, not to mention the quantum drive, it's got everything that you sort of want in a companion sort of vessel. But sadly, not all ships or snubs are quite up to the mark compared to the 85X.
Yes, because when we're talking about companion vessels, we're talking about these smaller vessels, not necessarily snub fighters. Snub fighters are the biggest category we're going to talk about, like your Merlins, your 85X, those type of vessels. But you also then have those other support companion vessels, like the Argo or your Dragonflies, which are going to be your exterior ground space vehicles that you can fit into other vessels. Any vessel that I can stick into a larger vessel is your companion vessel because it's going to enhance your experience. So let's start off with snub fighters here. So Hayes was talking about the 85X. It's really, as he was saying, the epitome of what a snub should be, being as it has all of that extra utility when if you look at the other snub fighters, they're lacking key components.
I think we're talking more towards like the Merlin and the P-72 from Kruger Intergalactic. These ships are very much focused on combat, but at the same time, they have fatal flaws. When you think about the lack of a quantum drive, and the fact that these are designed to get out and provide security or protection from, let's say, a constellation when it's under attack. If that constellation wants to run away and those snubs are defending it, and it jumps off into quantum, you've got a real problem. You've essentially now sacrificed your
Go get the door.
snub.
Go get the door.
Huh? What? Oh, I see what you did there.
That's essentially what we're talking about here. I mean, Hayes, you're better off being a repair person in my ship than going out there and dying. That's all it is.
It's all true. But if these snubs had a quantum-based ability, then as soon as your main ship jumps out, you could then quickly jump a very short distance. It wouldn't have to be a long-range quantum drive, just enough to get you out of the fight and then rendezvous with your transport. So the emission of a quantum drive for a pure combat and sort of escort vessel is a huge omission, and I think that is something they will eventually figure out when people realize that literally every Connie owner is complaining that snubs are worthless for defense.
Well, I'm just going to say, before we really get started on a couple things, there's going to be 3 complaints, which you guys are already saying. First one is, well, that's what makes the 85X so exclusive. Well, I hate to say, quantum drive is nice. It's nice that it has a decent quantum drive on it. But we're saying is a very base quantum drive, so you can get out. Or let's take a look at like your Carrot, for example. It has something for exploration. If you have a small quantum drive, it allows you to leave that and maybe your rover in a system exploring a planet, but also gives it the availability to go out and quickly maybe rendezvous somewhere, or check something out, and come back and allow it to accomplish its mission better, giving it better utility. Then you move on to your 2 seats. You're like, well, again, that's kind of where that vessel is. You have a larger vessel for transport. Well, again, a runabout is very useful, especially on a lot of different vessels where they may not be able to go somewhere, or if it will enhance the ability to explore, because again, it's not a good fighter, and it really shouldn't be a good fighter. We're not saying it should be a great fighter. And there's people out there that'll say, oh, I can do great in a Merlin. I'm like, yeah, take yourself and then put yourself against yourself in a better ship. And who's going to win?
Well, it sort of comes down to the idea that a quantum drive is more than just I can escape combat. It adds that level of utility for either sort of scouting, or you can jump off and leave it behind and it's not completely marooned. I know they have this idea, but at the end of the day, the Constellation needs more of a runabout, needs more of a utility ship or a little scout that checks up ahead to make sure it's okay before the main ship jumps in, or like a second seat, like you said, in order to transport something or someone down to the surface while keeping your ship in orbit. These all suddenly become really useful companionships, as opposed to a sort of limited, if you're under attack, you send out your snub, and if you jump away, then you sacrifice your pilot.
Who would get into snub in the first place? So just throw out the quantum drive. Like it at best is a distraction to get them to back off a little bit to give you breathing room.
And I mean, it's still not a full ship, even if you have a quantum drive. It won't have a jump drive. So like, if you want to go cross systems, the little ship still is going to have to rely on its mothership. So it's still, and because of a limited fuel and range, it still has to refuel after very short periods. So it's still reliant on that mothership in order to get around and do its thing. It's just that it's not completely gimped and screwed when it runs into trouble.
Yes, and currently, as the vessel stands outside of the 85X, the only use is really going to be either racing or very little covering utility, because again, that's all it is very minimal utility. If they just add a second seat or add some sort of quantum drive, some reason for you to give it some extra purpose, that'd be great. And I will say, the P-72 looks amazing though, because it is built for racing a lot more than it is anything else. So it's definitely going to be worth it for that if you're into that. But as a snub fighter, it still doesn't provide that utility that you would need.
Speaking of utility, there's no other ship with more utility than the Argo. One of my personal favorites, actually, as a snub. With
not quite a
cargo.
It really is.
Oh, come on. Just because it's, actually capable of doing things. I mean, look, it's great as a ship taxi for large sort of ships, so it can get people like down to a surface or move them around, or maybe a miniature drop ship, so you want to go under the radar. At the same time, for resupply between ships. And what I'm hoping they eventually do is to take off any sort of module and literally attach itself to a sorrel box, so that you could do things like taking boxes out of large ships and taking them into port. And so that whole idea of unloading cargo with an Argo gives you that extra sort of brawn and power in order to quickly move cargo from one ship to another, or from ship to port, or vice versa.
Honestly, more of the larger ships need Argos or other snub fighters just for that extra utility, because let's take a look at something like the Orion, for an example. It's a ship that can't go down the planets or to certain areas, so having something like that would help out. Or really, let's take a look at the whole series. The whole series, in my opinion, should have it stocked with like your whole E&D, as just having one or two of those to help unload cargo, or at minimum be able to help transfer crew and everything around while you're being loaded up in space, because that thing's not going to go down unless it collapses, and there's no point in collapsing the whole vessel otherwise, and it really makes sense having that type of utility.
Well, in the absence of ship-to-ship docking, the Argo personnel carrier, it makes a hell of a lot of sense on larger ships. I mean, how else are you supposed to move teams between ships?
Why the Idris and the Javelin both have a special spot, from what I understand, for that vessel, because it needs it for that pure utility. As soon as you hit a certain ship size, I'm surprised you don't have more of that. And even on some of the smaller ships, even if you don't go with an Argo, I'm surprised you don't have more of an official snub craft status for two-seaters.
Well, the Argo is not a dedicated military craft. It's a dedicated sort of utility vessel. So, and more ships, and I'm hoping, like you said, with the whole D&E, have a snub bay so that they can help them out with cargo or transfer of people, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm hoping some of the other ships will end up having similar Argo snub bays.
Well, again, I wouldn't really call it a snub, but a small craft. But the thing is, also, I'd love to see a very minimal quantum drive on one of those, because it makes sense also for a runabout in the system, being that type of, oh, well, my ship's refueling over here at Allistar. Well, I'm going to quickly quantum over while I'm here to Yella or something else and pick up a piece of cargo or drop some people off, so that way you can do things.
If you had a sort of a cramped area to get into that a bigger ship couldn't get into, adding that quantum drive, like to go a very short distance and then come back. I mean, if you're worried about things like Argos having a quantum drive, just make it just like the Kruger and little snubs. You just limit the range, make it extremely limited quantum fuel drive that it can only jump enormously small distances, but that's enough for it to maybe escape hot contact with some combat it meets and just sort of jump out of their range. Or that sort of drive makes sense just for very short ranges and emergencies.
Well, now let's talk about the space ground vehicles. Some of my favorite vehicles, which are like your Dragonfly and your Nox. I mean, they all provide different utilities. Like your Nox it's primarily a racing vessel, but it can be fairly useful in combat or on the ground. But you have the Dragonfly with all that utility there. But either way, the thing I want to be talking about is we're in the what century and we haven't invented something called rope? Like rope, seriously.
They said they weren't looking at putting like a tow bar on at least the Nox, but I think one of the developers actually did mention it one time very briefly. But I mean, like you said, a piece of rope tied onto like a grav pad to move cargo, just to make it that bit easier. Take large amount of cargo on a grav plate and drag it on the ground. Or like, you've got a ship and it's got cargo all over the place because you blew it up. Using something like a Nox or Dragonfly to quickly get out to crates, strap on a towing rope and then slowly drag it all the way back to your ship. You don't have to stock it on the ship. You just have to get it from A to B, and someone else secures it and you go off and get the next crate. Something like that makes a lot of sense.
And again, the question about rope also extends to this other thing, is these vehicles aren't just for racing or getting around places on the planet, but let's say you land on a planet and you want to fit your Nox in, hypothetically speaking, a Avenger, or some ship that they say that, or Reliant, that it won't actually, it won't connect in. I'm like, again, what happened to truckers cables or rope? Seriously, why can't you tie a ship down to the ground and say, well, this isn't going to move. Well, take me a few seconds to get it out so I can go explore on the planet, or grab some cargo, or do bounty hunting, or whatever you're on the planet for with that vehicle. Where's the rope?
Yeah, in the absence of grav plates or not having the space to do something, you should be able to tie cargo down with stuff like truckers' cables. I don't see why that shouldn't be possible, and especially makes sense for like a Nox in an Avenger or a Reliant, because you just got to sit it, park it, and then strap it in.
Well, the entire thing also goes to, because one of the reasons Snubs and support companion vessels are so popular as a topic, or at least with the people that we talk to, is because we are always going, what vehicle can we stick these in, and where can we, and how many can we fit, where can we stick them, how useful is it going to be, and then the CIG is going around and telling us, well, you can fit it in there, but you're not going to be able to lock it down. And again, that's just mind-boggling to me, because rope, and I know I'm hounding on this, but it just doesn't make sense.
And I suppose this moves into the last part, is the idea of having the land vehicles. I mean, we've got the Ursa rover so far. Technically, we've got the Grey Cat buggy, which is pretty cute.
It actually has a purpose, especially think larger vessels like a Polaris with wide hallways. You're trying to get to point A to point B. I mean, that may be the fastest way to run from one end to the other.
not to mention it will fit in smaller ships. Like, you know, if you can fit a Nox, you could probably fit a Grey Cat in there as well. And it's a two-seater. So, you know, it is a transportation based, you know, I can take another person more quickly over a long distance. I mean, have you actually seen how fast those Grey Cats go? When you're doing it in the hangar, it's like if you don't slow down and you turn, it's like it's going too fast, it just loses control and goes into a tumble. They're pretty fast.
Well, let's talk about the Ursa Rover. The Ursa Rover is another one of those vessels that is the epitome of what any companion vessel should be. It has some decent protection for the person. It is able to carry cargo. It is able to carry people. It's able to do everything the vessel should do, and is a great vessel. And there's even the Lynx Rover, which, well,
it's more of an upgraded, like posh rich man's Ursa Rover. Which is, you know, the rovers are nice, but I mean, they're starting to move into a phase that they weren't really ready for. The idea that now that planetside is finally a thing, that they're going to build a whole bunch of ground-based vehicles, probably a mix of utility and combat, and perhaps even anti-air, to sort of build up the gameplay element of planetside-based combat missions, exploration, and activities. So I think we're going to see an explosion over the next 18 months of ground vehicles.
Well, it'd be great to see something that could fit maybe in a freelancer, kind of like a Grey Cat with a longer flat truck. Think like a gator or some sort of golf cart that you see like on the grounds, where groundskeepers have those type of vehicles for storing supplies. Like, that's the type of stuff that would be the extra utility that you're going to want to see in a ground vehicle in Star Citizen, because a lot of people are going to probably want them as everything from cargo haulers to explorers, and you're going to need a wide variety of these type of support vessels. And
I honestly think they're going to have a SWAX-based ground-based vehicle. I'm absolutely sure of it. It makes sense for exploration as well as radar coverage. And then I can see them having anti-air for anti-ship based stuff, because I think that's the other big element. What's the point of having ground vehicles when your big Idris comes down for a flyby?
You're not going to get an Idris in an atmosphere.
Yeah, they get it back up. No, they have landing gear. They can land on the ground. I kid you not. They've talked about this recently. And that's a scary concept, and they need something to counter that, to make it like unsafe for aircraft to go within a certain area, to protect bases, to control areas, or even just to directly combat large spaceships just flying in and destroying everything. There needs to be two sides of the coin, and I think in future we'll see more of those sort of things, like anti-air guns and tanks.
Well, just all that aside, in general, everything we've said here is probably going to be talked about quite a bit as 3.0 rolls around, being as you're going to have more people asking, well, why can't I fit this vessel in this ship? Because why couldn't it lock down? Why can't I be my Reliant or my Avenger and take this in to explore a planet? And then you're going to get people going, well, now that I have access to a snub fighter in my X ship, why is it still limited? Like, why can't I have some extra space in there if it's not going to be anything I'm going to really use? So you're going to have a lot of people looking for this utility and everything. And I have a feeling they might head that way, because again, some of these crafts are currently in works in progress.
Yeah, I think they're going to start learning that having smaller companion ships that work with the bigger ships is going to be a really big thing. And so they should expand upon a lot of the utility and usability of these ships, as opposed to thinking that they're just sort of an extra person, like this idea of multi-crew, just another role for someone to do, as opposed to actually dedicated vessels that work in tandem.
Again, you can get people that expertise in those type of vessels, and that's an important thing. But again, no one is going to do multi-crew if it is suicide. When permadeath comes out, no one is going to want to do multi-crew if that means hopping into a vessel and it being suicide, or hopping into a vessel and being like, well, I need a search and rescue group now because I can't get back home.
Well, the more utility you pack into a snub and those small vehicles that work in tandem with the big vehicles, that is your multiplayer. That is your multi-crew aspect.
And the more vehicles
the
that
more,
you put them in,
the better, because the sky's the limit. You know, this is the thing that expands the multiplayer teamwork, I play with my friends type aspect, as opposed to, you know, just hiring an NPC.
Yes, and it's what's going to keep people into the game, because the more type of, oh well, hey, you want to hop in my Avenger? I'll fly my Avenger. You can hop in my ground vehicle. We'll go gang up on that person. Or, hey, we're going to go exploring. So why don't you hop into this vessel while and check out that asteroid field while I go scan over here, and we can see if we can find that wreck that's rumored to be here.
Or, you know, we're going to assault a ground base and we drop the caterpillar and, you know, drop off, I don't know, 10 knocks. and, you know, speed her in from, you know, multiple directions and flank them. You know, it's sky's the limit with these small vehicles, and the more of them, with the more utility we have, it opens up the gameplay options, especially with regards to planet side, so much.
Well, guys, what do you think? Are we completely wrong? Are we right? Let us know. I mean, what are your thoughts? Should snub fighters have maybe a very limited quantum drive? Should more ships have an Argo? Should we see more ships that can have rope?
Truckers cables, like I said, can't do without it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, we'll catch you around.
See you around.